Hi.
Welcome back, chat.
Totally not digging for stuff underneath here.
Surfing, surfing, because I need to sing something that's not publicly owned by a huge band. Surfing, I'm surfing, here we go. Surfing
CCCP.
That's all she wrote. Welcome in, everybody.
Howdy, y'all.
I'm very excited for today. Today, we're doing some skin. Speaking of skin,
Shabalinga.
Sarcastic Grandpa, thank you so much for that sub right out the gate. And Iterator.
Surfboard Girl.
You got Surfboard Girl.
This is
now,
where the stream where does she surf now?
I
don't
think
know.
She's a surfer.
I don't know.
Well,
she could just be holding the surfboard for someone who else is surfing. Her boyfriend, girlfriend,
is she
friend,
a model?
uncle.
A billboard
She
model?
could be a billboard model.
She could be a billboard model. That's the story we're going to figure out today. Welcome
She's
in,
the
everybody.
new Monument Hobbies booth girl. We're just going to have a girl with a surfboard at conventions. Seems good since all of our conventions happen like in the dead of winter. That'd be great.
Sulfur says, this is perfect. I have a model with skin and I'm terrified. I am so glad you said that in such a good way.
We are going to help you.
I'm very excited for this. So
we're going to help you.
Please, if you have questions.
In one way or another, you will either be inspired and find a way to make that model into something beautiful, or you will be helped by knowing that it's impossible, don't do it. How's that?
Yeah.
Is that what you wanted, Chris?
That's
Is that the
it.
inspirational talk you wanted us to have?
That is great.
Everybody can do skin. I don't even know what I'm doing.
Hey,
literally, I don't even have a plan for this skin yet.
So here's the reason why to really start.
I have some armature wire.
I wanted Jason to show us how to mount one of these because I have no idea.
My Fordham TX drill, a cork, and a model I want to paint. So the thing with this is obviously we can't hold on to her. She doesn't have the standard base we can hold on to. So I have a what is called a Fordham TX flex drill.
You also have one of those hand ones too.
Yeah, this is just too big of a resin piece, and I want to use like a heavier mounting with the armature wire.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to very quickly
that's perfect.
Dirty up Chris's entire area here.
That's perfect. So tell me a little bit more about this Dremel tool, Jason.
So this is called a Fordham TX. It is a tool that I have had in my arsenal for, I don't know, a decade or more now.
Yeah.
Because it is just a fantastic device. It has a foot pedal that I'm using.
Yeah.
Right? And the foot pedal allows me to have variable speed control. So it's basically like the throttle on or the gas pedal on your car.
Okay.
And it allows you with a variable speed drill to just get really, really good control over what you're doing.
For you could do your barrels too. Drill it.
Everything, and you won't melt the plastic because it has a tremendous amount of torque at low speeds. So it will push that drill bit into the material, even metal.
Interesting. Okay.
I bought it because it works with metal. I used to do a lot of carved bronze work, and so it would both carve, drill, polish, cut, everything I needed to do. It would do.
That's cool.
I'm going to have to remove your nice tape job here, Chris.
Oh, it's fine.
I need to dump this now.
No, yeah, you go ahead. You can.
Maybe I should wait till the end when I'm done doing this stuff.
Okay. Yeah, you can rip it.
Actually, I don't want to do that. I want to take it off now. Otherwise, I'm going to get all this resin dug in as I touch it.
Okay, so so it doesn't heat it up necessarily.
Well, I mean, the problem with drills, if you've ever really, used a drill in any seriousness, is that when you start drilling lightweight materials like plastic, speed is your enemy.
Yeah.
Okay? You don't want to do high speed for lightweight material. You want to do low. Like if you're turning wood on a lathe, that is a much slower lathe than turning metal.
Yeah.
Look at that. Like nothing happened. Of course, I'm going to dirty it up again too. So, So yeah, This one will allow you to go as slow as you need to for the material. So like on this resin, I don't get any chipping or anything, and it clears out and does a really nice hole because I can have it turn very slow.
Okay.
And so for plastic too, if you just drill gun barrels really, really fast, you can get burring and melting around the edges because the drill bit heats up.
Right.
Don't want it, don't need it in my life. So
Clarkertron's saying, really quick question, do you take precautions when drilling? I always hear that you do. Ted Onion says you should wear a mask. Tell us a little bit more about that, Jason.
When you're drilling resin, you don't want to get any of the particulates. You don't want to breathe any of that. So if you know you're going to be, it's really not, with drilling creates dust, and you saw the dust fall down, then I dump the dust, right? If you want to wear a mask, you definitely can. It's probably better for you. Yeah. But I'm not doing a whole lot of work. So you saw that most of the resin clung to the drill bit there, and I just dumped it. So it's not that you can't have resin dust on your fingers and stuff. You just don't want to inhale it, right? You don't want any solid particulates getting into your lungs if you can avoid it. Yeah. So that's the big thing.
Hey, Surfer Girl, says Rattlecan. Yep. If you're all ready for this.
I'm going to just
We're very excited.
Do a quick guesstimate. I'm going to cut myself 2 lengths that are about 1.5 inches long.
And what kind of wire is this?
This is just aluminum floral style wire. It's not wrapped. It's armature wire in the sculpting world, but it's just aluminum wire. And I don't remember what the gauge is. I think it's like maybe 12 gauge.
Got you. Armature wire.
Or 10 gauge aluminum wire. Something like that. It's pretty big. It's like stout electrical wire. But you get it in aluminum, and you can get it in multiple sizes, right? So I keep it, I generally have 2. I have a smaller, which is probably like a 16 or an 18 gauge wire, and then a big one like a 10. Right. Because with these 2 sizes, believe it or not, they're pretty different, but I can build an armature for anything I want to sculpt.
Got it.
And I can mount pretty much anything to the base. For the surfboard, we'll use the smaller stuff, but I'm not going to mount it today. I want to get going.
Is there a way to get specs on what we might need to look for when getting a drill for mounting busts? Or the model he's using?
Any Dremel style drill will technically work. Yeah. My Fordham is overkill, right?
Yeah.
But it's because, like I said, I've had it for decades for working with metal.
Right.
And it just so happens it does all this other stuff great too. So, you know, look at me. That's going to suck.
Oh, is it a little too...
I didn't bore it out correctly. Oh, maybe I did.
I
just had a flared end on the aluminum there.
There you go. Ted Onion says, what about a pin vise? Oh, a pin vise.
I mean, that's hand one. That's a hand drill.
Oh, yeah.
The wrong terminology, right? Because I think a pin vise is technically the little vise that holds the stuff while you drill it. That's not the necessity. The necessity is the hand drill itself, right? I think that's what you mean. Right?
Yeah, that's what Ted Onions are just making sure. I think that's what you're talking about.
This is a hand drill.
Oh, yeah.
The pin vise is the part that goes with the hand drill. That's actually a vise. It clamps your work so that you can turn your hand.
Oh, okay.
This is not a pin vise.
Oh, okay.
That's a hand drill.
Got it.
Just terminology.
Okay, so that's pretty easy.
Yeah, and then I'm just going to get a pair of pliers just so I can make sure that's embedded in the model pretty good.
Yeah.
The nice thing is that when I'm done, I basically just take this and I clip them off flush at the end.
Okay. And
sand them down. I'm not trying to pull the pin back out at any time.
Right.
That's not a thing.
Because you leave it on the cork unless you're going to do... Yeah, I guess, of course, you would leave it on the cork unless you're putting it on a plinth or something, right?
100%, yeah. I mean, the whole time I'm painting, it's left on the cork.
Right.
It will go on
something.
A plinth, right?
Yeah.
At some point. Now, you notice I'm using my hobby cutters only because I know this is aluminum. You would never use hobby cutters for anything this thick that wasn't aluminum. Just want to make that clear.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now on here.
And then just work it in, huh?
Well, I'm not going to be able to push this into these corks, so I just need to mark it.
And drill it.
And get the drill, yeah. Unfortunately, these corks are real. Well, I say unfortunately. You want a very dense cork, so you don't want a cork that is going to let you push the pin into it if you can avoid it. The trouble with cork is that it never really...
That tool's awesome. I got to get
see how slow I'm spinning it?
Yeah, that's awesome.
It can go like... It can go super, super fast.
I need one of those.
But like with barely any pressure. It's just like a tattoo machine. is basically the way it works. Is that I can like my tattoo. I don't know if anybody knows about tattoo machines, but with a tattoo machine, it has a foot switch as well that has a throttle on it, so that you can basically dictate, how fast or slow the needle is pushing ink. Same thing here. Speed is when you have various materials. Is always just a great tool to have at your disposal.
Yeah.
Yeah. This drill, it is expensive. This is probably like a $300 or $400 drill, but when you're doing like metal and jewelry work, it's well worth it.
Cool. Okay. Well, thanks for showing us that. I was hopefully somebody.
So I did 2 pins on her, obviously 2 legs. Normally I would just do 1 center pin if it were a bust that that was cut at the waist or higher, but since the legs split out, I would not mount her with just 1 leg. I go ahead and do 2. That way it keeps her stable side to side, front to back, the whole 9. Now this can be sat anywhere and she's fine.
That's cool. Well, thank you so much for showing us that. I needed it. Chad, hopefully you did.
And you can use paper clips. You don't have to go buy custom aluminum armature wire. For most of what you're mounting, you might be able to get away with just paper clips at the scale we work with. She's a little bit bigger. I could have used lower gauge aluminum for that.
Yeah.
Or even the paper clips, right? Paper clips have been what I've pinned nearly every model I've ever painted with. Like back in the day when all the GW models were metal, it was paper clip, paper clip, paper clip.
Yeah, because obviously those are tinier models, especially wargaming models.
Yeah, and you don't want to push a big drill through them because you don't have the space to, right? So when you're, even with plastic Space Marines, you don't have a lot of surface area at the bottom of the foot to drill in, and you can cause problems. I don't know if anybody noticed it when I was painting Lord Bzzzt.
Yeah.
Right? I did the same with him, but I did him with the smaller armature wire.
Oh, right, yes.
Right?
Yes,
so he's done with the thin stuff rather than the thick stuff. But I could have done him. I couldn't have done the thick stuff with him because he didn't have a place to drill the thick stuff in.
He didn't because he's got those little plastic things, the flanges,
the nubs on his boot that I will just use as a way to sink him into whatever basing material I do. But on him, you wouldn't notice it now, but on him I poked through with the drill. Right? Because see how his ankle on this side is so angled? And this one was not as harshly angled. And so when I drilled straight into it, it poked right out the side where his ankle bone is. And so I just filled it in with super glue and you'd never know. But you just have to be careful as you're drilling. You don't need a lot of depth, but you need enough. I would say that when drilling into a model, you probably want about 3/8 of an inch to a half an inch if you can.
Yeah.
When mounting a model of this scale for bearing its weight, right? So that I can move him like this and he's not going to fall off. He's not going to bust off the nubs or anything like that. And the thinner they are, the deeper I make them go into the cork. So these, I believe one of them at one point had even come out the bottom.
Oh, okay. So they're pretty...
These are pretty long.
Pretty long.
Yeah, they're a good 1.5 inches, which is usually where I start. On her, I could cut them off a little bit just because they're so thick. She's still not going to go anywhere. Yeah. I do that and she flies off. But,
cool. Well, thank you for showing us. Yeah. That's great.
Definitely.
What about Blood Walrus is asking? Oh, also, Blood Walrus, thank you so much for that sub. I see you and I hear you. Do brass rods clip that easily as well?
No. Brass is going to be a little bit harder. It's not as soft as aluminum. So for brass rod, while you can clip them with hobby cutters, I typically will buy a pair of dikes from the hardware store. I have a pair here someplace. No, those are not them.
I'm not sure what that is.
Well, okay, so like my pliers that I used have got a wire cutter portion.
Right.
So this is a very handy tool for us as hobbyists because it's big enough as a needle nose plier set, but these are pretty heavy duty. And with that wire cutter, that will cut anything, including up to steel wire of small gauge.
Yep.
But all of your copper, brass, aluminum, steel wire, you can cut with something like that that's really meant for doing more electrical, or you could cut probably fencing wire with that. Aluminum fencing wire stuff that's hardened a little bit better. So I would always have a tool like this around just because it'll help you get, pesky tops off and everything else. So this Husky set from Lowe's or whatever has been in my studio toolkit forever. And then I have a nice pair of just, again, hardware store needle nose pliers that are tiny.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of cool little things.
Yeah. I'll use this to hold parts when I use it. Like with the heat gun, you can see they're kind of blued on the end from using them with flame. With a butane torch to heat stuff up and melt wire.
Cool.
Whenever I'm making antennas for tanks and stuff like that. So just having something that doesn't make you have to hold it with your fingers is always good. Okie doke.
Wow. So where do we start with?
Well, I don't know, chat. Do we want to just do this all brush? Does that make it easier than doing like an airbrush base coat?
You mean like going all brush and no airbrush?
No airbrush on the beginning stages. I mean, would you prefer me do that, Chris?
I think so. The only reason why is because if you don't have an airbrush specifically, right? I see both values, right? Because like when you did Antonio, we saw how you did mostly with his brush on his face, right?
All of it. He was done all 100% with brush. We didn't use airbrush on him for anything but the primer.
I adore all brush. You know, well, and sulfurish, you make a good
sulfurish,
point.
Yeah, okay.
That is, do it with an airbrush, then go ahead and redo it.
Wait a minute.
No, I would say do it with a brush because here's what I will say. Do it with a brush because I feel like that will really show us a technique. That'll really show us good technique. I think you could do this amazingly like you've done obviously with airbrush, but if you do this with brush, we'll be able to see it, the anatomy come to life.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Okay.
So all brush.
I'll show you how I sketch my paint on and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
I think
down.
That's good. Obviously,
I'm down.
You can do it with an airbrush.
I'll make it work. Anything for you, Christopher.
I think this is because here's the other thing. If you don't have an airbrush, then sometimes, because we get that all the time, right? Anyway, I think it's good to use it with a brush, chat, so bear with me.
100%. I don't have a problem with that at all.
Plus, you'll actually get to see it from start to finish, and there's no excuses, chat.
No problemo.
There's no excuses.
No problemo. I think I'm going to use royal purple.
Oh.
I've really been enjoying royal purple, so we're going to do the royal purple undercoat as opposed to the dark purple. Somebody was asking, like, how would you start male versus female? I think with the female, you can go with a little bit of a brighter color underneath. Again, I'm trying to avoid anything that makes it seem like the dark purple, dark blue is great as both a shadow, but it can also, when used in the right way, can also be like that 5 o'clock shadow, which is where stubble would be, or hairy arms, or things like that. Obviously, on the female form, we don't want a lot of that. We're not trying to have hairy parts.
And you use 27 psi, right? Is that right?
Right. Well, I can't tell where it's
just
set right now because it's not on, but it's about 22, 23.
23.
Not 27.
Not 27. My bad.
22, 23. Every now and then it gets bumped here on the table and it goes like up or down 1 or 2. But
we're very scientific here.
Yeah. 22 is my preferred space. 20 to 22 can do everything I want to do with an airbrush. There's no need for me in a very dry climate here in Arizona to ever change from that.
Yeah.
Depending on where you're at, if you're in an area that has high barometric pressure all the time, you might need to go a little bit higher in order to get your paint to spray the way you want it to. You can also in some areas go a little bit lower. But you'll know in your area. I would tell everybody that I could to start at 22 and then adjust up or down as you need. I never adjust, though. I'm one of those weirdos. Unlike, you'll find a lot of painters that will use the PSI adjustment, like some brushes have a pressure adjusting knob. I never use any of that. I set it at 22 and I just spray everything because it's all about finger control. How much of that air do you let through the aperture of the nozzle at any given time? Until you get that finger control, that kind of hand-eye coordination going on, and that muscle memory, then adjust through the PSI all you want, right? If you need to go high PSI because you're used to just barely giving it any air and you need that air to be very forceful the moment you pull it back, then go higher PSI. If you're good with the entire throw of the pull on your airbrush so that you can have good control with just a little bit or all the way back, then you can put it at a much lower pressure.
Awesome.
If you have a hard time and you typically pull the airbrush all the way back, then you need to go to a lower pressure. That's kind of where the teeter-totter is, right? Is that if you find when you're using your airbrush, it's easier for you to press, right, to get air, and then pull to get paint, and then you're pushing, and if in your pull you find yourself pulling all the way back or a lot and getting a lot of paint all the time, turn your pressure way down. Because that will make sure that you don't get that sputtering and that nonsense spidering that happens early on. It'll help you. It won't give you the ability to do everything you want to do with the airbrush because you've taken away the variance in pressure, but that's typically the way to do it. And with that, we're not going to use an airbrush, so here we go.
Perfect.
All that talking, we're not going to do it. You guys told me not to, so here we go.
Why
Look at this nice, clean palette, Christopher.
I love
Thank
having
you
a
so
clean
much.
palette for new projects. I committed. So why for as you're using royal purple, because you normally use dark purple, what's the difference there?
Really just vibrancy.
It's just vibrancy?
Yeah, just vibrancy. The amount of color and the type of color. This will give me probably depending on how I layer over the top of it, right? It could give me nothing if I go super heavy.
Yeah.
But in most cases, this is just going to give me a little bit more of that red, dark purple leaning a little bit more into the blue side of purple.
Dang.
If that makes sense.
That royal purple is awesome.
Oh, it's so good. And the nice thing when you're doing underpainting for flesh is you don't, can you pop in one more?
Yep.
You don't have to worry about smoothness, right? I'm just looking for color right now. We're not even looking for base coats because this purple, nobody's ever going to see it as purple, right? They're going to see it as a kind of a complementary to the skin. It's going to give us a shadow color, right? It's going to be a purplish nature to the skin, but I don't have to even make sure that it covers completely. I just need enough color in these areas, right, to make sure that it gets me what I need. And I'm going to choose to do most of the model shadows in this way, but since I'm not doing an airbrush, I'll be a little bit more specific where I put this. Normally, we would just airbrush this model all purple, right?
And the model is from Kaha Miniatures.
Kaha Miniatures, yes.
Not
Katarina Gorska Kaha. This is a different Kaha. He's a great guy. Has some great sculpts. Really neat stuff.
So when you use a brush for a big, talk to me about this anatomy, essentially, because I see you painting in a very particular way instead of just slopping it on, right?
Yeah, right now, because this model has really great anatomy going on, I can see... Oops. That's bad. I need to move that out of there.
I'm like,
the foot switch is in play.
Yeah. Sorry, say that one more time.
The biggest thing for me when I'm going through and determining where to put paint, if I don't want to just paint the whole thing. Now, you could very easily just go ahead and paint the whole thing, but what I'm hoping to do here in a tutorial sense is kind of show where I'm focused on these shadows. And so I'm going to look at the form of the body, right? You can tell, like, on the side of the rib cage here, right? If I hold it, you can see that the rib cage comes from where it's out in the light, and then it kind of comes down. So I'm going to paint some purple down under the scoop, so to speak, of the rib cage. Then around back, she's got folds in her skin because of the way she's kind of arching her back. So underneath the scapula there, and then a little skin, and then here around the hip area, I've got area to make shadow purple. Right, so I'm just kind of exploring at this point. A lot of it has to do with the sculpt. I'm just looking for where I would have shadows. Obviously, under the arm would typically have a good shadow spot there. Again, this is why we don't want to use a dark blue or something, because if the skin goes over, it might make it look like she's got really bad pit hair. If that's your thing, go for it. I'm going to assume she is trimming. We'll do something like that. Then I'll rotate around to the back and just kind of use that underneath the whole arm where I know there's going to be a shadow. Same thing that I did with the thigh, just looking at it from a perspective of where light is going to hit, where it isn't going to hit.
It's a really cool way to sketch out. It's almost like
it's all it is sketching.
Planning. It's like almost you're planning it out
live, right? And it allows you to really have fun with it and not worry about it, because I don't care if it's smooth. None of that matters, right? Same thing with the curvature of the breast. We have the globe of the breast, so I've got coming down the breast line from the shoulder because that's exposed, and then I've got the purple underneath the breast line. Her bikini covers everything underneath, and then over here, right? Does the same thing. I will do some right at the top of the rib cage, just because the breasts themselves will create a shadow. And none of this is super specific in its shape. We'll refine this as we paint.
Yeah.
But this just gives me an understanding for my underpainting where I'm looking to have these colors be. Right. Purple itself, in the way we're using it here, is literally just the shadow. Right. Now, it will also give the idea of veins and things like that underneath the skin because of its coloring. But we don't have to be super worried about that right now. Right, so again, just kind of down the sides of the belly right here because of the arch of her back. Do a little bit underneath the belly as it goes down into her waistline. And I just want to make sure if I've done, like I did these first brush strokes pretty quick and they kind of disappear into the black background. So I'll go back and brighten them up so I do get some purple punching through there.
Avian's got a question about this. Would you want to do different colors for shadows when dealing with cloth versus skin?
You could. depending on the color, right? It's all like when we talk about skin like this, is what color do you think is underneath this skin? Now she's just human, so we know she bleeds red, right? Fatty tissue, greenish yellow, kind of undertones to it. So we can do all of that because it's in the known quantity. Now, if I wanted to paint her with alien skin tones, what does that mean? Right? What color would that be? If I was painting an orc, what colors do orcs bleed in your world? And you get to make that up, right?
Yep.
We know the surfboard is blocking this, so I'm just going to go ahead and do this whole arm in purple pretty much because of the way the surfboard is. So same with clothes. Like if she were wearing a red t-shirt, what do you think the shadow for the red t-shirt would be? There's a line of thinking where you could say, well, everything I would want to do kind of a unified temperature of color. So I might use the same purple or blue for everything, including the clothes. But you could also change that, right? I could use purple on the body, blue on the clothes, whatever I want. If you have a cool shadow on one part of the model, you probably, temperature-wise cool, you probably want to stick with a cool temperature shadow across the entire model. I wouldn't switch to a warm orange or red, if that makes sense. Now, the part that always gets us in trouble.
Oh, wow. Look at that self-control. And when I have self-control, I grabbed my slide whistle, but you're like, you know what? I'm going to be a professional business paint man today.
You're not touching butts.
Very cheeky, says Jason.
Very cheeky.
No, Bakamaru says very cheeky, Jason. I can do it to that. Thank you, Bakamaru. You helped me out there. All right, I get one. That's it. This is serious business. We only get one, chat. That's it. Only one. Everybody calm down. What would you use for a red skin tone? What would you use for a red skin as an undertone?
Red skin, again, purples work great, but I would use the dark purple, not the royal, because I don't need the reds from the royal purple, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So I would go back to dark purple, which is more of a bluish purple. That would be great. You could use things like Payne's gray, dark gray blue, anything in that dark blue or dark purple range, but you want to lean more into the blue side of purple when doing red skin, I think. There's a world where you could do browns, right? That's a possibility too. So don't underestimate any color. Greens, because greens can, when green and red get together, they make browns. So you could be doing greens underneath red, just not reds is typically the way my brain thinks. It makes things look too monochromatic, right? That's why you see me shifting color of shadow in most of the models that we do. Is just, even if it's not meant to be seen outright and, over the top. Yeah. It's just meant to be there as a way to help guarantee that everything doesn't look too flat, right? If we just paint skin with dark brown, mid brown, light brown, it tends to look like a bodysuit, not like it's alive.
Okay.
And so where do you bring life into skin? Skin's one of the most important things, even on a Space Marine lieutenant, where it's just, a little bit of face showing. It's still very important to give it life, because the rest of that model sure doesn't have any life, right? It's all armor and guns. So being able to breathe a little bit of, reality into it, a little bit of blood and guts underneath the skin has a huge value. Again, I'm not blending anything. This is just sloppy brushstrokes, folks.
And Danger Boy says, I'm about to start painting the Hulk. Should I still use purple?
I do. With our Hulk, we use blues because I painted him with purple pants. So one of the things to think in terms of composition is that I used maybe Payne's gray or dark blue, I don't remember, but a bluish shadow for him because of using the traditional purple pants. And I use the same dark blue as the shadow for the purple pants. So it ties it all together. But if I were to use purple as the undertone for his skin, and then you give him purple clothes, it starts to fool the brain into thinking that must be a reflection from his pants, which doesn't make sense. So try not to, if you have a major component of the model, that is purple or blue, then alter or pick which of those you would do. Because like if it's a purple marine that I'm painting, say I'm doing a Soul Drinker, I'll do dark blue as a base. I obviously wouldn't use purples. If I'm doing ultramarines, I use purple, right? So gives you kind of a place to start from. You know, when we did our ultramarine, we actually started from burnt sienna, right? So that gave him kind of a dirty, rusty feel rather than purples when we were doing just very quick dry brush workout. So there's all sorts of colors that you can use. On Hulk, I like the dark blues. If you're going to do purple pants Hulk, that's just me. My childhood Hulk was purple pants.
Purple pants. Oh yeah, I feel like that's a classic Hulk.
Yeah, so it's always going to be, you know, Hulk smash in purple pants.
R.I.P. Paintlicker says rip tutu Hulk.
Yeah, that's not a thing.
There's a tutu
I don't
around.
even know what you're talking about.
There's a little Easter egg for you, chat. There's a little I Spy while you watch this base coat go on. Jason hates me. No, false. Jason doesn't hate anybody, Paintlicker.
Why would I hate you?
We're here for you.
What did I do that made me hate you?
I'm sorry, Jason hates fun, not you.
What?
Jason hates fun. False. No.
Since when do I hate fun?
When do you hate fun, Jason? Division Ring says, when you're choosing this base/shadow color, what influences it more? The intended temperature of the shadows or something like the expected color of blood/veins? Great question.
For the shadows, it's a combo, right? It's really just giving yourself a cool color, cool temperature color to sit on the model in juxtaposition to all of the other colors you know you're painting, which is why purples and blues work 99.9% of the time. That's just the reality, right? Because if you lean into a purple, even one with red like this, it'll be a cooler color than anything else I use on her because all of the rest of it is going to be skin tones, and skin tones are all in the orange, brown, yellow, pink range, so there's no cool tones there. Make sense? Mm-hmm. So with skin, it's easy to pick purple or blue. It gets a little tougher, like I said, whenever you're picking things that are outside of that realm. Oh, I probably ought to paint her eyes the right way today, too, huh? Before we get too far down this road.
Sure. What's the right way?
The right way is painting it before I put all the other skin color on.
Oh, you really?
Oh, yeah. Why
is that?
Well, we've done that before.
I'm trying to remember why though.
Well, it's just easier to not have to
I'm sorry. Yes, you're right.
Surgically insert the iris and sclera in between your finished color of skin.
Yes, okay. Got you, because then you paint around it again.
Yeah.
Got you. I remember.
Yeah, you frame it all back in.
Right.
Right. She's shading this side of her face with her hand, so I'm going to go ahead and, that's where the sun's coming from because the model's already told us, right? She's shaving herself from the glare of the sun on this side. So there's going to be some shadow that extends out here too, but we're never going to hit that perfectly in this pre-paint phase. So while I know that I'm probably going to have some shadow on that side from her arm, I'm not ready to commit 100% to it because that will happen later in the model. All of the OSL, which that is, right? The sun is our light source. And we're going to have to, at some point in time, factor the sun in here on an outside beach day.
Yeah.
Right? And paint some shadows on her. We're going to have to do some projected shadows.
Is it a magic hour? Is she at noon?
Yeah. So
determine. Yeah, you have to determine the time of day.
I always do 10 or 2.
Yep.
Right. So there we go. That's kind of it.
Cool.
That's kind of how we do shadows. And you don't have to be perfect. Like I said, you can work on, like this side's probably going to have more in shadow all the way down. If the sun's on the other side of the model.
Yep.
We've determined that. Then this side is probably going to be in deeper shadow just because that's the way it works. Even when on the beach, if you're in direct sunlight, you're going to get really harsh shadows. Especially when painting at scale and you want to bring a little drama into it. So sometimes, we talk about the fact that we overdo our contrast in miniature because it helps us tell a much better story. And that's kind of the spot we're in here. Plus the surfboard's over here, so there won't be a lot of indirect secondary reflection hitting this side of her body, so to speak, because the surfboard sits in her arm. We can put a lot of this into shadow.
Nice. Welcome in, everybody. We're so happy you're here. Where have you been? If you're just now tuning in, welcome. We're doing Surfer Girl this week, painting up some skin. So if you have questions about how and what Jason's doing, depending on his technique for skin, ask away. What about light diffusion for the backside of the model, says Ted Onions.
I mean, it's always something you can do. Realize that, remember, she has a surfboard that keeps diffuse lighting from hitting. Now, depending on the color we paint the surfboard, right? The surfboard could reflect back into her body and brighten this side of the body up too, but I'm not willing to make that commitment right now. I don't know what color the surfboard is going to be, how reflective it's going to be.
Right.
So right now we're just going to assume the surfboard isn't there, paint the shadows on, and then we can adjust this with skin tone as we get to that point where we're finishing the model.
Yeah, because I guess depending on what the surfboard color is, especially in the sun.
Right. If we were to do a largely white surfboard, there would
like
be
a
some
bounce.
glare back against her skin because the surfboard's going to catch the sun direction this way and then amplify it back onto her body.
Yeah.
Right. I'm just not ready to make those types of decisions. That takes a lot more planning. You would have to storyboard that out, so to speak, and which is totally up to you if you want to do that. That's not the way I paint. I'm more willing to say that I know that I've got brightness over here, which is funny because everything's black on this side, and then shadow over here where my brighter purple is. Okay.
Can we get a hot pink plaid surfboard? What about a plaid bikini? Bright gold non-metallic surfboard. Where are the real suggestions? No, that was a real suggestion, Mo. We hear you. Your thoughts and questions and concerns have been recorded and documented
For posterity.
and we will do the research to see if that is legally
we're totally not
able.
researching that.
Now
we're moving to yellow-green.
Yellow-green.
I think. That sounds good to me. We'll do yellow-green, I think.
Yellow-green? I like yellow-green.
There's two ways to do this. A lot of times I'll go ahead and I'll put the green on and then we'll stitch it in between with the reds. So I think that's what we're going to do here.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it helps place the reds easier because you put the green everywhere the purple isn't, and then you stitch in between the green and the purple areas with the red is a really good common way to think, or easy way to think. I don't know how common it is. I kind of made this up years ago, but it works really well.
This part always gets me when I'm like, oh, this is the oh my gosh, trust the process phase.
Oh, she starts looking like She-Hulk.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is where we go. And we're just kind of going to sketch in these areas of the belly. I don't have to worry about the way it looks. Skin is very textured. So I can make sure that I have lots of texture on here if I want. And we smooth it out later. So it's not like you're losing the ability to have very smooth skin. By having that texture, it kind of just helps with making sure that none of this looks too blotchy or grandma's quiltish when you do the glaze over, right? And so this is literally just color in all the spots where we didn't put the purple. I'm going to go ahead and do some kind of fingers of color into the purple like that. Kind of some sketchy blending. Not really blending. That's kind of a lie. But just a way to make these shapes not be, completely geometric. Again, we want to make sure that as we go over it with a glaze, nothing's going to be too noticeable as a shape underneath the surface. And here I'm just looking for the rises and falls of the sculpt.
And Edfo has a question. How could you create temperature contrast on this piece? Temperature contrast.
How do you mean? Like a warm and cool side?
Yeah. You have to explain that.
Well, since she's out at the beach, that's not really a thing. Okay. I mean, it could be, right? She's going to be very yellowish, sun-drenched skin color on the one side,
Mm-hmm.
and then we could make the shadow a little bit cooler and dramatic on the other side. I don't know that that makes sense because, as people have mentioned already, when you're out on the beach, there's a lot. I mean, the water, the sand, all of that is very reflective, right? The sand can reflect light almost like water does, almost like glass. Mm-hmm. So you have to be a little careful in the way that you go through and represent that. Now here, because we've chosen or decided on this light color after the fact, I know that I'm going to have this that I painted purple also need to come out into the light. I'm going to go and backtrack over my purple. It's never bad. Just big burly brush strokes too. Not a care in the world.
This is the part where you start really seeing the anatomy come to life too.
And from you know what you can do is you can always look at where the sun is.
Yeah.
Right? This is where the sun is.
Yeah. I feel you.
Right? So always pretend you're the sun looking down on the model. This is me, 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Would be covering her face.
Right.
Right.
And so now you know where your shadows need to go, and you can see if you're putting your highlights in the right spot. Right. And then, you know, it's harder on this side to say, okay, this is where the sun isn't. So you don't want to see any green here because this is where your secondary reflections come from. So you might want to be doing something depending on your materials and such. But I'm pretty comfortable with where we're at with this so far.
Bakmaru says, Northrax had a cool idea that would be fun to see. Blue, cyan, green around the bottom of the legs and board standing in the ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could do that.
There's
like she was out in the water. That'd be great. You could then do like, I just complimented Eric today. Eric Swenson got his best in show at World Model Expo for that ridiculous model he did.
I haven't seen it
with
yet.
Victor Aguilar. It's tremendous. Like absolutely freaking tremendous. The model they put together. It's a pirate in the arms of a siren under the water.
Really?
Yeah, it's stupid. His water reflections are stupid.
That's awesome.
Yeah, they're so good. It looks like, you know, when you're 20, 30 feet down. It's just perfect.
Gotcha. No, I haven't seen it. Sounds pretty dope, though.
Again, just really choppy brush strokes coming over the...
Yeah. Now, it's funny you mentioned that because when you started to describe where the sun was coming, I just realized, too, that she's blocking her face of the sun.
Yeah.
Right?
That's why it's decided for us.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right?
I wonder if that was intentional.
What do you mean?
Like, if that was
by the sculptor to give us something really cool to do.
By the way, this is where the sun is coming from. Unless she was, I would only assume she's doing that to block her eyes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So
I mean, that's what your brain registers immediately in this.
So I thought it was. So that's kind of a cool way to put it in the sculpt. Like, hey, that's where the sun is.
Yeah, I like it. As I was walking around Contrast looking for models that just kind of spoke to me.
Yeah. This
was one of those. Again, we'll take a look at where we're at. You can see how we need to get this area that I've left open here. Now, this area around the rib cage is probably going to be a little bit more pinkish. There's less fat around the rib cage, so there's not going to be as much need for the green yellow here. So that's something that we have to take into account, but I'm still going to put it here.
Okay.
Because it's doing double duty. Remember, the green and the yellow bring warmth to the flesh underneath, as well as the feel of, you know, fat and cell structure underneath the skin. The top dermal layers. So it's not just that you paint this wherever fat cells are.
Right.
It's that we're looking to warm the skin up there too. Now that will need to be a little bit more red at the end of the day.
because you use like red oxide.
That's what we'll use probably, is red oxide, something like that. I used to use burnt red. Red oxide's a little bit brighter, so I like that.
Boo Ray, gonna make her undead?
Yeah.
An undead surfer girl. Surprise. She's
She
a
is
zombie.
100%. So that's looking pretty good.
Yep. You definitely can see where the sun is.
Right?
From that.
Probably go a little bit more aggressive on her shoulder here.
Oh, yeah. Looks great.
You're starting to see, like, we can see here, I can see this portion of a rib cage over here. So you notice I left that with the black. Where this comes out. So we'll have a little bit here. And then
just a skosh.
Just a skosh. Right? It fits together kind of like a puzzle piece when you get it right. And again, from this side, looking back up, you shouldn't see a whole lot of light. Now, obviously, the curvature of her thigh, the curvature of the trunk of the body, light will carry around that. It doesn't just stop abruptly. There's no edges.
Yeah.
Right? So, we can create the feel of warmth through things like where the rib cage pops out like this, and we can do that with the flesh tone. Remember that when skin goes over this, it adds its own warmth. So it will have an effect of its own as well. You're just trying to give life to it so that it doesn't just look like a tan or brown.
The green he is using, Robin, is yellow-green.
Yep, just yellow-green.
That right there is the link to it.
Obviously, fingers, again, not as yellow. More pinkish. Right? More capillaries and blood vessels close to the surface. Means more flush nature to the coloring of the skin. So areas like hands, knuckles, the palm, more yellow. But her palms are in shadow.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not worried about that necessarily. We could put a little bit that we ooch in here on the pad of her thumb if we wanted to. That's kind of a stretch. Right now, the goal is just to continue covering the areas that we didn't have the purple on. Check our work all the time, making sure we made the right decisions with the purple. You've seen me right at the breast line go ahead and add some more purple back on there a minute ago. If I notice my coverage is incorrect, my angles are wrong, then definitely go back in and fix that.
Can you recenter a little for me? Perfect.
Right, sorry.
You're good. Hoosier, Surfer Girl Skin Giggity, welcome in. Hey, thank you so much for that. 19 months. Thank you for that sub. Hoosier,
remember that small details will not survive the work you're going to do in a little bit, so you don't have to worry too much. You're just trying to get blocks of color sketched in.
It won't survive. Gotcha. Because that's
because you're going to glaze over it. So any teeny spots of green I put in, or like if I do like a little wispy line like this, or something like that, it's not going to survive. It'll never show up. It has to be big blocks of color to survive the glazing over the top, which is why we're doing this kind of very punchy, sketchy mode. Right?
This is it's like magic. Magic when it happens.
Yeah. Yeah, because so much of the color disappears.
Yep.
Right.
But it just makes sense.
Right,
it just makes sense, chat.
A little bit of her forehead.
Stick with us.
Might. Some of her forehead doesn't get shadow immediately. This side does. This side over here is probably, depending on where I want the sun, I'm probably still pretty good here. Right? Do a little bit. Again, fix that in post, as Chris likes to say.
Fix it? No, Gandalf. No. Fix it now. Fix it in pre. Rattlecan says, I am no rookie at paint, etc. I struggle to wrap my brain around this method/color combo. Me too, Rattlecan. And then he waves the magic wand and doodle-doodle-dee, ding. And you're like, wow. I should be able to do this now. I'm very happy that we're doing this one in particular. because this is such a great example for skin. It's like the quintessential tutorial, I feel like, for painting skin. It's a perfect model. Has a light direction, has all of that stuff. Rock has a question. Hello, I've recently started painting a plague marine using orange for the armor. What would be a good mix with your orange paint to get a color more similar to Fire Dragon Bright? I got the mega set. Fire Dragon Bright.
I don't know it as a color. Maybe Chris will look it up and I can take
let
a gander.
I
feel like probably a red.
Oh, this one's okay. The layer color, it is this one. It's almost Nova.
Like Nova Orange?
Nova Orange.
It's almost like Nova Orange. Judging by what we're seeing on the
Yeah.
monitor right now, it looks more like our Nova Orange than our regular orange. If you wanted to make that with our regular orange, I think you have the base set?
Mega set.
The mega set. If you have the mega set, then you have Warm Flesh. I would say that Warm Flesh and our orange get you there.
Yeah,
not a whole lot of Warm Flesh. That's not a 50-50 mix by any means.
Punisher says, do, fix it in post. That's what I always say. 100% definitely, Chris. False. I never say that, Punisher.
Every day I hear him yelling at his people. We'll just fix it in post.
I won't. And you're banned.
That and ambient light. That's all I hear.
Ambient lighting. Thank you. It's a part of the team's requirements.
That's all I hear over there.
It helps. Are you relying on the water in the brush here? Let me go back up here real quick. Robin says, "Are you relying on the water in the brush for diluting rather than thinning the paints down further?"
Yeah.
Great question.
100%. That's how I paint. I would never recommend, especially with our paints, to thin them on the palette unless you have a specific task you're doing. Like if you're going to do a lot of very thin glazing or filtering, then you'll notice that I'll thin them and you'll see me use the mixing cups for that, right? Mm-hmm. So I'll put paint in a mixing cup and I'll thin it and get it exactly the way I want when I know I need a lot of it diluted. But if I'm just painting like this, right, where I'm going in at various opacities, then I'm basically having to think in terms of thin or not thin for each time I go to the model. Sometimes I want it a little bit thinner as I'm placing and working out my placement of color.
Yeah.
Sometimes I want it to be not diluted at all when I'm going for vibrancy. So the control comes from making sure that every time I go to the palette, the paint is exactly what I need. And that means it's as close to right out of the bottle as possible. 9 times out of 10. So yeah, never be afraid to just use the water on your brush. Now, this is a big brush. This is a number 6. So this big brush holds a lot of water, so you got to be careful or you'll over thin all your paints. Because it will just hold so much.
Boo-Ray says, you may have already answered this already. If I wanted warmer shadows, would I do a more maroon color? Be something in lieu of royal purple or dark purple?
I mean, yeah, you can move into reds.
In lieu of it, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think that reds are where you would want to be. I like dark plum. Dark plum still reads as kind of a shadow color. Reds, I typically am very careful with reds as shadows because they look more specifically like, glow of fire and whatever, right? Yeah. So I just always want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing if I'm using red as a shadow color. Making the right choice. It's telling a story that there's a glow someplace. Red may be brighter than some of your other colors, so it may not read as a shadow. So things like mahogany, burnt red, right? Dark plum, those would be my choices because they still will get you darkness.
Mm-hmm. Blood Walrus has a good question. If you were going for a very pale, washed out skin like this, like it was under fluorescent light, how would you alter the underpainting? Pale washed out skin like that under a fluorescent light.
So that's very specific. And I don't know that I can envision in my head what you're going for.
Pale,
because
washed out skin.
Pale washed out skin under a fluorescent light could oversaturate very easily and lose a lot of the nuances of color underneath the flesh because you're getting the reflection. Depends on how close the light source is, I guess. But that's the only thing that I would say there is that, you got to be careful when doing those types of things to make sure that you're able to, if you still want to make the skin feel alive, then maybe don't make it as close to the light source. Maybe have the fluorescent be further away. Pale flesh shows more of the color underneath, generally.
Dazzle says, I bought a glass palette to try out this weekend. Not sure how I feel about it yet, but it feels a lot easier off the rip to use Pro Acryl on it. But I was over thinning on accident with my wet palette. Yeah, Jason talks a lot about how he just uses the moisture on his brush with his glass palette.
Yeah. It's a big difference if you've been using a wet palette in your whole journey or, enough time in your journey of painting miniatures. Realize that the miniature painting world is like the only one that uses a wet palette. They just aren't for much in the art space.
Wet palettes in particular.
Yeah, like I said, how many companies out there make wet palettes in the fine art space? Masterson's? I think that's it. So there's probably some in like Europe or something where Masterson's maybe doesn't reach, but it's not a big thing because it's mainly for specialized watercolor and gouache usage. Not much for the rest of painters. Miniature painters got into it, because at first we were having to use a lot of paints that were not really built, I will say, for miniature painting. They were very thick, like enamels and such. And so because you're using thicker paint, you needed to thin it down, and you were thinning it all the time. So whereas, I got used to just using the water on my brush, when you were using enamels, you couldn't just load it up with a bunch of lacquer thinner all the time, or you wound up with all sorts of other problems. And that looks like all the rest of that leg's in shadow. I feel like I'm pretty good here.
Division Ring says, bit of an off-topic question. I've been waiting for the expert paints to show up at my FLGS so I can try them against the scale artist, but I remember you talking about trying to set up a new Canadian distributor solution. Is there any update on and how, when I can expect that impact when the expert line will show up at a local retailer? Division Ring, I'm assuming you're in Canada.
Yeah. Not right now, unfortunately. I've been answering a lot of these questions today, believe it or not, with regards to the Color Forge. And with everything that's going on, it's just, there's a bunch of hurry up and wait with Canada right now. Canada's doing these tariffs against us. So right now there's a bunch of tariffs with regards to steel and aluminum that are affecting our products, like our brush soap might be scarce up there for a while. As we figure all that out, I'm not going to make everybody pay, 10% more so I can eat 25% tariffs, but they've hit us with 25% tariffs for stuff like that. And that, obviously everybody's heard about that nonsense that's going on.
Yep.
So, we've just got to kind of wait for some of that.
See what happens.
Yeah. And it's
kind of a wild west.
We are incorporating in Canada. We're opening up an office in Canada. All of that is underway. It just takes the attorneys a long time. We focused on stage one of that was Europe. Europe is now open, but still not up and running completely with the web store. So that's our first focus. And then as soon as that is all done, then we can kind of shift some of our focus back over to Canada. Canada was meant to happen almost simultaneously, but that was back before any of this, happened. And it was intended that all of this would be a lot easier. Turns out Canada's harder to deal with right now than Europe. But we'll continue to work on
it. General question from George here. Let me go back up here. How do you figure out where to place the light and shadows on a mini?
A lot of what I've been showing you is that kind of zenithal look. Like
Yeah.
if I look at this model like this is me being the sun. Well, now I have green everywhere the light is hitting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Other than the clothing.
You just have to pick a direction.
Just pick a lighting
As simple
direction.
as that might sound, you just have to
It's really
pick a
all it
light.
is, right? It's really all it is. Might be a little bit that I'm missing the opportunity over here.
Blood Walrus says, going back to the pale skin, specifically a living person that doesn't go outside much, if at all, under bright fluorescent lights, such as those old tube lights from the 80s. So you're just talking about really
Remembering that there's a surfboard in front of this arm, so that's why
yeah,
there's not.
you're just talking about really pale skin, Blood Walrus, and then just fluorescent lights on it. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, fluorescent lights can be different temperatures as well, so they don't. They can be whatever you need them to be. They make them in warm and cool temperatures. I think typically when we think about fluorescence, it's a cool, clinical, dead kind of feeling, like in an office where you don't feel like there's a lot of life.
Yeah.
So it's not like they're using expensive daylight bulbs and things like that.
Sure.
But you know, so in that case, I think you're really, when you're doing pale skin, you're bringing out a little bit more of the undercolors, the purple and the yellow green and the reds, the pinks. You're gonna see more of that, and it's gonna, I don't want to say feel unhealthy because you get too much into zombie skin at one point in time, but pale skin doesn't appear as healthy as sunned skin does. It's just a thing we think of. It doesn't mean that it has to look sickly, right? It just means that more of the color of the stuff under the skin tends to be visible. So more flush, you know, more pink in the pink areas, a little bit more of that yellow-green showing through, although you don't want it to be too yellow because it starts feeling jaundiced, like they have liver problems. So there's a balance you have to keep there. You may want to change your colors up a little bit. Go with something that's a little bit more camo green than yellow green. Will give that feel, but it could be too dark. You know, the reason I like the yellow green so much is because they take care of a lot of the value as well, because we'll go bright yellow green over this, and then the bright yellow green or possibly a yellow over this. Since we're outside in the sun, I'll probably just do a yellow. I don't need the green part anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I tried this exact, Droth says, I tried this exact skin underpainting yesterday, but the glaze didn't play well, and it ended up looking like it didn't even underpaint. How do I thin to get the glaze, the flesh glaze?
Stick around, I'll show you.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question. And speaking of questions,
welcome everybody.
We got there. Welcome in. We're painting up some skin this week. Blood Walrus, I'm glad that helped. We love those specific questions. The more specific you are with a question, the better it helps me translate it to him to give us painting nirvana knowledge.
Division Ring, you're correct. The shipping issues have been the biggest issue. Navigating all the shipping strikes and everything that Canada Post and everything has been doing, it's very volatile, and we don't want to make a huge commitment and then be sitting on things, having to work out new shipping contracts with other companies. So we're trying to handle that all at once. That's a big sea to navigate. And then the tariff thing came in the middle of that. So it's just like,
so much
wow,
going on.
How many curveballs are they going to throw at us to work right over the border? But we're not doing ourselves any service, so you know it's not Canada's fault exclusively.
So
all
where
right.
are we at?
I'm good with this. I think we want to go into some reds.
Oh, yeah.
So let's get some, I believe red oxide feels good to me today. Again, a little bit brighter, a little bit more oranginess to it. And the way I like to talk about this is there are some areas on the human body that everybody recognizes are going to be more reddish. The cheek, right, like right below the top area of the cheek. On women, you can bring that up a little bit further into the rosy cheek nature. Too much, and it winds up feeling like there's makeup on it, so I don't know that I go that far. But you're going to use more red than purples on the face for a woman, or female skin. Male skin just doesn't have the same blood vessel makeup and all of that, and the fattiness in the cheeks is different. So there's some anatomical differences that you want to take advantage of there. So like I said, less of the purple in this area of the jawline, right? So where she has got her smile line and everything now, I'm going to put, starting up here, we're going to go with red underneath that. It would normally go over to the ear and the temple. She has a flower there, so we're going to kind of stipple some of the red in there too. Remember, don't have to do a lot of detailing here because it'll get lost in the overpaint. So you still want the colors to be blocky. But we're going to push that area of purple to where it's literally just in the shadows, right? So we're going to get the lobe of the ear.
Nice. Yep.
Right. Again, the purple over here makes more sense because the purple over here is going to be where we see shadow from her hand. So that's playing a little against the story to some extent. You can do the tip of the nose, a little bit up at the pinch of the eye, right? A little bit on the eyelids if you want. Right? All of this kind of area here. And same thing over here. Although, again, the shadow from the hand is going to change a bunch of this, so we're probably only going to pull the red right along the cheek, and then we will let... I'm going to go ahead and do the lips here. And then we'll let a lot of this fall back into purple because it won't appear with the shadow we're doing. It won't appear like 5 o'clock shadow or stubble on her, right? It'll look like the shadow from the hand. We're going to go ahead and do a little bit of red right up here by the pinch of the eyebrow and the forehead, right, where all of this blood comes into the face. And then we can come, usually now in all these other areas, I start talking about, okay, stitch the green and the purple together. And by that, I mean exactly that. Just where the green touches the purple, just go in with a stitch of this color. So right here along the curvature of the breast, just go here and do the red. Right? It's literally stitching these. Think of it as two halves, and you're just stitching them together with the red.
And can you explain why that?
Well, it's a neat way to very quickly identify where colors need to go. And most of the time, if you've done what I've just shown you with the purple and the green, it's also most of the time correct. Now, not always, right? There are areas like where the skin is taut, like here on the ribs, right? We talked about how where the ribs are, there's less fat, right? And so there's going to be more, this is more like the top of the hand than anything else. So I probably want to have my my green kind of just centered on this muscle area back here. So I can bring red like this. And then like this, be more aggressive with it as I go up into my shadow right here and back here too. So the green doesn't live as much along the rib cage. Leave a little bit there. Right? But then I'm stitching all of this together. Like I said, we're not looking for pure anatomical correctness. That would take a lot more effort than what we're willing to do on miniatures most of the time. But what this does is it allows us to get that setup of blood under the skin, right? There's blood vessels everywhere. So you won't go wrong. There's no area that doesn't have blood, right? The elbow gets a little pinkish, right? But it's one of those areas where, you can glaze that on later.
Yeah.
But, I typically hit it pretty big with red because there's not fat there. So you already know in your mind a lot of this, even if you never once in your life think about any of it, you kind of already know. Knees, right? That area where, there just isn't a lot of fat. As opposed to love handle area, breast, butt, cheeks, thighs.
That's what it's starting to look. I wanted to punch out for a second. I just wanted to see how you were stitching it all. So yeah, okay, that's it looks like one of those medical books, like an anatomy book, like a diagram.
Exactly.
Like where's this tissue going?
And you want to lean further into the purple with the red than into the green if you're using your green as a highlight like we are here. So you'll notice that I'll stitch, but I'm pushing further into my purple with the red, or in this case, just kind of balancing right between them to some extent. I banged my brush over on this side as I was doing my brush stroke, so that'll be an interesting spot of musculature there. Right.
Very defined. Pragmatic has a question. I'm painting the Phoenix from Kingdom Death and trying to do an iridescent effect of the feathers similar to the legally distinct Sanguinius you did, but I think the feathers read as black. Do you think a mix of transparent black and blue would be good for final overpaint?
Oh, yeah. I love transparent black and blue.
Crow feathers.
That's how I would do crow feathers. It's how we do the black armor for Space Marines. I've done that before. It just works great. Right?
Yep.
Do it very, very thin down. Dilute the heck out of it. Right?
That's what I'm going to do with my Psychro Pragmatic for my Lord of Change Earthworm Jim diorama. If you all missed last week, here's an update for you. Last week, crazy business. We had so much going on last week. We
really did.
We had our holiday. When I say holiday party, no, our birthday stream. So Jason was painting some Vespids. We did a lot last week.
Great.
I wasn't here one day. It was kind of
Chris
everything
keeps
was.
Days off.
I do.
Slacker.
I know. I really need to check myself at the door, chat, and make sure I'm ready and accountable. It's mainly for you, chat.
Think you take vacations?
What's that? That I take vacations?
It's mainly for you, chat.
Hey, I take vacations for chat so that I am here at peak capacity energy for you every single day. Speaking of B-Day stream, did you get my info? Yes. Thank you so much. Great segue there, Sugar Russ. I got a slew of everyone's messages. I am currently working on getting you all of your butts. And your gift cards and all of that. So I am working on that now. You will be getting a response from me this week. So keep me accountable, chat, but I am here for you. I was doing that this morning, so.
Again, just stitching green and purple. And I'm doing it where if it doesn't make sense, if by stitching them together I lose the purple entirely, then I'll probably just leave it purple. Right? Because like here where this cleft of this rib falls into shadow.
Why would you?
It doesn't really make a lot of sense for me to do anything else there. I can probably do, a little bit. But like I said, if you don't have enough color there, it's not going to register at all. Right? This is that area where we probably wouldn't have that green anyway. So we'll just cover that up with red. Boom. Bada boom.
Speaking of great segues, thank you, Tadpole Jackson. Welcome in. We're so glad you have chosen Monument Hobbies for your viewing pleasure. And I knew people would like this. I knew people would like this. So I knew people would be into it. If you have questions about painting skin, ask them. If you've seen our tutorial on painting El Tonio Tigre glazing faces, right? This is a very similar thing.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Just taking the whole body.
Where is it? I was going to grab that. Here we go. I'm going to just copy and paste this one. If you all haven't seen this video, check this one out. You can see a different variation, right? If you were here for a stream and it's our birthday, will Chris sing to us? False, Nightbling, I won't. I won't sing for you.
He will, but only legally distinct versions of his favorite tunes.
Happy birthday to you. And I'm sorry, Avian was asking earlier about surf music. I told you that I was singing copyright-free surf music. Surfing the United States of America. Hooray. I'm not even going to even do it in tune. I run a tight ship. Speaking of surfing up, you guys are the ocean.
Oh, geez.
You're the ocean, chat. So I knew you'd like this. I knew it deep down in my heart. I'm like, you know what? Surf's up, chat. You're the ocean.
Here we go.
I'm the boat. Jason's the captain. This gal's whatever she wants to be.
At least I'm not the captain because nobody pays attention to me. This is a mutiny if I'm the
captain.
No,
Jason, we pay attention to you.
Mm-hmm.
We truly do. Truly. Avian, hey, thank you for those 16 bits. Oof. I tried, Avian. I'm sorry that music wasn't up to your musical needs. But I tried.
Is it starting to make sense?
Yeah. It is. It's like I said. It looks like anatomy. Looks like an anatomy sketch, which is cool.
See, from our sunlight direction, we still have got good highlighting where it needs to be.
Yep. There it is.
Right, from down here.
Got
a little bit of light like on this hip where it probably wouldn't get, but I really like that dimension on the model, so I think it makes sense.
No, Roth, I won't join a Beach Boy cover band. And we do not that was my own music. Don't credit anybody. I made that up from scratch.
Did you though?
I did. I went to look for Nova Orange on the website. Is there no bundle with it? No, it's its own specific deal.
Yeah, it's its own specific deal. There's not a Nova specific set. Their logo is literally one color and
That's
white.
it.
So
what band plays the song Pepper? Says Boo Ray. I don't know. Google. It's out there. Google it, Boo Ray. If you squint, it almost looks like the Predator vision from the OG movie.
yeah.
I just did that. Did you see that? I was like,
It's pretty. It is like heat vision almost, right?
Yeah. Val Thorne says, checked out for a little bit. So back to the wet palette conversation. You pretty much recommend a dry palette or really dry wet palette with modern paints, with more modern paints? ?
Yeah, things have gotten thinner, right? So I say that our paints especially, right, are made to use right out of the bottle. Other people's paints are kind of a toss-up because you get paints that are very thick. Even within a line, there's really not a lot of consistency, so you do need to be a little careful with some of those. But ours, I've really been striving all along to create consistency between colors. There are still going to be some that are less opaque because of the nature of pigment. But all in all, you're going to get an ability to use a paint the way you expect it to use based on using other Pro-Acryl colors.
Yeah.
And you can just use dry palette water on the brush and get really great results. Now, that may not fit your painting technique. You may have your wet palette dialed in. Use it. I have never once been the guy who would come in and say, oh my gosh, don't use a wet palette. We joked on like the Trapped Under Plastic podcast and things like that to have a good time.
Yeah.
But I'm not here to tell you what to do. Far be it from me to say if you've got something that works, stop doing that.
Right.
No, painting there's as many ways to paint as there are painters. You'll hear me say that all the time. And I stand by it. If you have something that works for you, that's the best way for you to work. No matter what somebody says. Not me, not anybody. I don't care how long they've been painting. If you're like, no, I like the outcome, then continue to do what gets you that outcome. Now, if you're struggling,
change it up.
then change it up. Try to find another way to use the tool, blah, blah, blah. There's still a lot of people, fantastic painters across the planet that use wet palettes to great extent. So don't feel like you're not. But if you're having problems with your wet palette, I can expose to you what the reason for that is, We live in a world where hobby paints are made by companies that create house paint. You've heard me say this a bunch.
Yeah.
And house paint is not meant to blend. House paint is meant to give you opacity and one coat coverage. And with art paints, that's not the case. There's not a world of fine art paints where the goal is to give you instantaneous wall paint coverage.
Right.
They're meant to blend, layer, work to get exactly the storytelling aspect that you're going for. And so in doing so, you want to be able to vary the opacity and dilution of them. But a lot of them just need a little bit of water. You don't have to add a lot of water to get them to work. The thicker the paint is, the more you have to dilute it just to be able to use it comfortably off the paintbrush. And I feel like that's where a lot of hobbyists have been for so long, that they use the wet palette because they think that they have to dilute the paint just to get it to flow correctly. And that, can cause a little bit of issue, obviously.
Killjoy says, how did you pick these colors? They don't seem to be human flesh tones. He was talking about that a little bit earlier. Can you recap why you paint the green?
What colors do you see in my skin right there?
Yeah.
Is that not yellow, green,
Yeah.
purplish, and reds?
Underneath.
Right? So none of these colors at their raw form are what you recognize with skin, but every single one of them, when desaturated underneath the dermal layers, because remember, skin is not opaque unless you're an elephant, right? And even then, I have never been close enough to an elephant to really know. I bet they have thin parts where the knees bend where you might be able to see through. I don't know.
A little bit.
They have leathery skin, right?
Yeah.
So like cowhide, you're not going to see through anything with a leathery hide that's very thick and protective. We do not have a thick and protective hide. So all of those colors exist here, every single one of them. And so when you look at it, it gives you the nature of that, knowing that we want to go vibrant because I'm going to put a skin tone over the top of this that is going to desaturate it and make it look like it's underneath. I created this in my head as a way to paint, and I don't remember where I saw it as a teenager, but this was something that I think was maybe shown to me by my grandmother about, hey, you know, the classic painters used to do this thing and blah, 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 blah. And maybe I picked up on it there. To me, it just made sense because the scientific, logical part of my brain knows that when I look at something like skin, well, skin is layer on top of layer on top of layer on top of layer. And if you go and look at a cross-section of skin, there's these ones in the science book that look like they cut a cube of skin out, and it shows what all the layers are. Right? That cross-cut section.
Yeah.
And you'll see fatty tissue, you know, the area where all the blood vessels are, right? The major artery areas, the musculature, right? And then the dermal layers on top of that. And so when you think about it, how do you paint? Like if it were posed to me, how do you paint skin? I'm like, well, okay, well, my brain says I should recreate that science picture.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah.
So I would paint flesh tones, and then I would try to glaze those colors back over the top. And it always felt to me like you had done a tattoo on the skin, right? It makes the veins look too weird because that color isn't on top of the skin.
Right.
My brain tends to think in terms of depth and layer, right? And so skin, the purple and the green and the red aren't on top. So if I paint the model in a skin tone and then glaze the purple and the red and the green over the skin, that's wrong in my brain because those colors aren't on top of the skin. And paint layers like skin does. Paint is a physical thing when it cures. It's a layer. And even though we can glaze it and make it look like it's very desaturated, it still sits on top of the skin. Why would I do that unless it was a tattoo or some paint, face paint or something like that? So I started in my head decades ago, thinking in terms of, well, why don't I paint like skin is? Why don't I put the bone underneath? Why don't I put the muscle over the bone? Why don't I put the fat over that and the blood vessels? Why don't I do all of that? Which is what you see me doing here, right?
Yeah.
You've got the shadow of all the deep gut stuff is the purple. Not really a thing, right? And then the green that I painted second is the fat. And then the red is all the muscle and blood vessel layer, right? And so who cares the way you stage it here? It doesn't matter. It's all just kind of conglomerated on the body the way that we're doing it like this. If you wanted to do it purple, then red, then green, that would be better, right? Because the green sits on top of the red, so we could go back over with the green on top of the red or whatever. But it's not, that really doesn't matter as much as creating this subtle undertone that gives you this when you're done, right? It gives you all that coloring when you're done, as opposed to glazing some sort of flush pink over the top of the skin, because that's not on top, right?
You know what's interesting? Yeah. And I'm glad we're using this as an example because you can really see it stand out too. I'm trying to think of how I would do this on a smaller face. Would you do the similar tech on little faces too?
Well, we just recently did one. I don't remember which one we did, but
I don't remember either. I thought you did.
Yeah, because during the whole...
I'm sorry. You're Old Hammer dude.
Maybe so.
Yeah.
Maybe so.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, you know, a lot of people will ask like, okay, yeah, does this travel to scale for Warhammer? And yeah, sure it does.
Yep.
It's more like, because like I said, you're not going to pick up small nuances of color when doing this.
Right.
So you got to be a little careful in that. Meaning that at scale, you know, like on this guy's face, you're not going to go to that. You're not going to get a little hairline of red to show through the skin tone.
Yeah.
So you have to do it very blocky. And that's why I say you do a stripe of like dark gray blue across the chin under the nose. Then you do a stripe of red that goes across the cheeks and the eye. And then you do the green at the forehead. And then come back and do the green on top of the nose and a little bit on top of each cheek. And then paint your skin over the top. And it gives you fantastic results results when you paint at scale.
Yeah.
But you have to do big blocky chunks of color or they don't survive. A lot of people I see will go green and yellow and purple, and it's all this fine detailed fine work, and then you put the skin over it, it disappears entirely because the layer that you put of the skin tone over the top as a glaze blends all of that together almost to obscurity. So you have to make sure that you're doing it in scale to where it's big chunky effects like this. Right, big swaths of color. Then you can go back and you can add more nuance to halfway through doing your skin tone. So like if I go over the top of the cleft of the butt cheeks here with the skin tone and I lose this area of purple because I haven't left enough purple there, well then at halfway through the skin I can add a little bit more shadow to it and then glaze over the shadow too. So I can continue to adjust this stuff as we go.
Humankind, thank you so much for that raid. Welcome in, Raiders. Perfect
Welcome,
timing.
I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of red that would be kind of the pinch of the bikini line.
Jason is doing some skin today. And this week we're going to be painting up this bust, really showing you a good skin workup. I'm having to go back and redo my I was working on my little ratlings faces this week.
Yeah.
And I just don't like how they came out at all. So I'm like, I think I need to go back and maybe apply some of this.
Yeah, you could. Oh, sometimes remember that working at scale, you can get lost in it, right?
Yeah,
Those
I think
ratlings are tiny,
they're
and it can
so
be very
small.
frustrating to kind of try to figure out how to make something like this work at that scale.
Yeah.
So if you feel like you're running into frustration when doing so, then don't push it too hard.
Don't push.
You know, you can just do like a dark flesh, a medium flesh, a light flesh, then a wash, and then re-highlight with a light flesh and get a lot going on.
Yeah.
Then do maybe just a little glaze of dark gray blue in the chin area to make them look like they have, I don't know if you do in your Hobbits, like they have 5 o'clock shadow or whatever.
Some of them have little beards on them.
There are tricks like this that you can do at scale that still have the same effect.
Right.
Because you have to ask yourself at some point when you're painting such a small figure, do you even care about what we're doing here?
I was just thinking about it as you were saying. I'm like, I don't need it.
Do you even care?
They're like this. They're
Who
hobbits.
cares?
They're hobbit
You're talking
faces.
about it's a quarter of your fingernail on your pinky finger is what you're seeing. It's like we didn't do anything like that with this guy because this is tabletop quality dry brush 90%.
Yes.
So this guy's face is fine.
Right.
And all it is dark flesh, shadow flesh, tan flesh.
I need to go back and
Who
watch
cares?
that and do that.
Who
I
cares?
just need to do that.
Like legit not even a worry in the world about it. And again, half of his head is metal. So it only gave us half of a face to play with. But even on stuff where you have a whole Space Marine face, is it worth the effort? Right?
Yeah.
Or can you just do dark flesh, medium flesh, bright flesh, and be done? Again, that's a question you have to ask as an artist. Don't let me dissuade you from doing that. I've shown you how underpainting at scale can work really, really well. But you have to determine, is that what you're trying to get? Because it can be very frustrating if you go in and say, oh, you know what I want to try to do? And then as you're doing it, you're not having any fun because it's at scale and you feel like, well, that was a waste. Why did I listen to that guy on Twitch? Freaking idiot.
Yeah, I think that was my problem. It was like I didn't need to complicate it like this. Because I also did little versions of these, right? But I think I need to go back and just redo it that way, essentially. Time is flying, everybody. This is a good info stream. If you have any more questions, hit me up. If I didn't see one, double check that you tag me at Monument Hobbies and I will get it read. Derpstick says, I did try the purple, red, green on a marine head and it did come out decent. Nice.
Yeah.
Derpstick. Hey, Derpstick, you're on Twitch here. I see you. You're normally on YouTube. Nice. Both versions are great. I just noticed your name. I'm like, I know a Derpstick. And that's you.
The sides of the fingers a little bit.
Rattlecan, can you do something as large as Surfer Girl with dark flesh, medium flesh, and light flesh?
You can, sure, yeah. I mean, the purpose of this is not to make you feel like if you want to paint a bust that you have to go all into this. This is just a way to show you how you can get some really cool skin tones out of what is a advanced technique. and that number one, you need to be able to get these colors and work through these colors that don't make any sense initially, and that number two, you have to be good at glazing, right? Because the hard part is yet to come. This is all the easy stuff. This is where my brain gets to relax.
I was just about to say the glazing.
The problem is about to occur, is where you have to go over all of this and maintain it, right?
Yeah.
Because we've already heard from chat, which is like, hey, I've tried this, and while I really like the idea, I lose all my underpainting. What am I doing wrong?
When they glaze in particular.
When you glaze in particular, right? Because the glaze and making sure that you keep the ability to see these colors at the level you want means starting way thin, right? Getting that color built and sketched on and being okay with it looking like absolute crap at first.
You call it the ugly phase.
It is the ugly phase, because the first layer of skin tone you put over. Now, if you can get good at airbrushing, you can make this a lot easier.
Yeah. But not everybody has an airbrush.
Not everybody has an airbrush, right? So that's why we're not doing that.
Yep.
And I won't airbrush on purpose. We won't airbrush any of the skin that we glaze to show you what you can get away with. I'll get it to that finish level, and then I will show you what you can do to use the airbrush for later blending. Because there are some really, really cool things you can do with the airbrush that help you to blend all this out at the end. But right now, this is pretty good.
Ghoul Studio says, hey, Jason, I usually do this as well, but I use cyan, blushy red, and yellow. Have you tried out other undertones before? Says Ghoul Studio.
Yeah, tons. I just settled on these because, number one, they're the most flexible. They give me the most realistic undertones for flesh that I can kind of control. I get that kind of fantastical nuance that I like in my models. A lot of times I'm not painting Surfer Girl. This is a rarity for me to paint something that is such slice of life.
Yeah.
You know? So I like to paint monsters and combat dudes and, all that kind of stuff. So for me, these colors work really, really great for everything. They're a good middle of the road. Cyan I don't like. It tends to be too blue. It can work okay, but I find that purple gives me both the blue and the red that I want. And just works better. Payne's gray I might use, but it could be too dark of a shadow. Lately I've really fallen in love with the royal purple, because it just gives us a really cool purple that still gives us a cool color against the backdrop of the red and the green, but is also warm, so it kind of fits in line there. Yeah, and we can go alter it as we need, but I'm liking that. That's looking pretty good.
Yep.
Now we'll do some yellow. Now you mentioned yellow, and I will do yellow, and I think we'll probably go with bismuth yellow on this.
Yeah, I was going to say, what about yellow ochre or bismuth yellow?
Bismuth.
Yeah.
Just a bright yellow. Because we're out in the sun. We got to think we're on the beach, right? And if she's tan, then yellow is going to be a big component of all the flesh tones that we use at the end of the day, right? Matthew Dallet, Verdaccio, there's a bunch of different names from old, painting study, but I am not a trained artist, like from art history type training.
Yeah.
So it's not something that it's something that I've kind of squeaked together over the years.
Yes, Matthew, does this technique have a particular name? It's underpainting. Correct?
I just call it underpainting, yeah.
Underpainting, yeah.
And you can do underpainting for all sorts of reasons. For value, we're kind of doing that for all of it, all of the above. Right? So this yellow is for value, meaning that it will give me the brightness of where my highlight will actually sit on the model, so that when I put my flesh tones on, I get light and dark playing together, which is kind of neat.
Let me zoom back in here. Meat Treat says, I bought the dark warm skin, and it makes my mini look like a Simpsons character. What is the correct usage of the dark warm flesh?
Dark warm flesh is a highlight, right? To do kind of what I'm doing with underpainting, but to do it over the top of your flesh tones. So skin is, again, it's a tough one to get used to painting, because you've got so much nuance to skin, right? And typically what you're looking at is the ability to take your flesh tone from a starting point and then up to a highlight that matches. If you just do, again, a medium brown, light brown kind of a workup, then sometimes it looks like a bodysuit. It doesn't look like flesh. And so what we try to do is paint that skin tone, and then in and amongst that skin tone, get a highlight like a warm flesh that gives you the idea that it's outside in the sun, as opposed to like a tan flesh, which it's funny because thinking about it after we release that color, people think it's for tanned skin. No, it's tan flesh as in tan, the brownish color.
Tan flesh.
It's a tan flesh because it's actually a pretty bright color, and it's fairly pale because tan.
Because it's tan.
Because it's tan. Not tanned flesh.
Right.
And so that throws people off. But yeah, you just pick a skin tone. I typically like to start with something like shadow flesh, or lately I've been using burnt umber. And that works really well as a burnt umber, shadow flesh, tan flesh, or I would go burnt umber, shadow flesh into dark warm flesh. The dark warm flesh is more of a highlight color. Can it be a skin? Sure, it can be a skin tone. You can put it on and paint that on and then do a wash over it, and you can get a good skin tone built up.
Rock Barn says, so in Vincy V's video on orange, he mentions that blue-green work great alongside oranges. I'm colorblind, so I have a hard time telling which colors in the range would be best. Any recommendations?
For what are we doing?
He mentions that blue-green work great alongside oranges.
Yeah.
I'm colorblind, so I have a hard time telling what color range best. Any recommendations? So
for the oranges or the blues or the greens?
I'm assuming you're meaning blue greens there, Rock. So, well, I thought it was tan flesh. Yeah. No, yeah, Rock. Let us know. Going back to your question, are you looking for a blue green recommendation or an orange recommendation?
Because the regular blue works really well. Regular green works really well. But it just depends on what you're doing, right? If you're desaturating it and doing like beat up orange Space Marines, then you don't want to use a bright blue and a bright green probably, right?
Meat I'm glad that answered your question.
Some of this yellow won't survive because it will be in the smallest areas, but we just put it there anyway.
Won't survive.
But we do it anyway.
And George is asking, what's the thought process behind the red and yellow?
Well, the red is your blood and musculature. The yellow is fat and dermal tissue. The purple is guts and shadow.
Right. Rock is saying a recommendation for blue-green. Vince mentions that the blue-greens make the orange pop when it's a secondary color. A blue-green.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of see that's, for fun, not for any kind of color study. Well, I guess it kind of was, right?
Yeah.
When we did the Guardian, right? We did this kind of desaturated orange.
Yeah.
Right? It's all beat up.
Yep.
We did all the chipping and weathering on it like an old tank or vehicle.
Yeah.
And then I did blue and green. But I used camo green, which has a lot more yellow in it. So the green playing more into the yellow of the orange can work really well for that dirty feel, like if you're doing beat up stuff. If you're doing a brighter orange, right, then a green that leans into blue and a blue would work. But this is just straight up blue. Mm-hmm. It was maybe dark blue, dark gray blue, blue, and then sky blue highlights. And then, over here I've used ivory flesh over the top of mahogany burnt orange, right? And then this is probably dark camo green. I might have started with like a mahogany on it too, on the green.
Killjoy's got a great question. I'm new to painting. What does saturated/desaturated mean?
Oh, great question. So saturated, let's see if I can just grab a couple of colors that make sense right off the bat. Here's one. So let's take purple, or let's take plum, right? We have plum. Plum is a good saturated color, right? It's got a good amount of vibrancy to it. And then faded plum is the desaturated version of it. Think about if you start to strip the color away towards white, gray, or black. That's what desaturation is. If you look, there's a if you Google what's called the HSV cylinder, hue, saturation, value, I implore you to use that instead of the color wheel in everything you do painting three-dimensional objects. Okay, throw the color. Well, you don't have to throw the color wheel out. It can still be okay. But because most of what we paint deals in saturation and value as being the biggest components to contrast that we try to create on models, the normal color wheel is out the window. Because if you look at it and you say, here's my primary, my complementary, and my tertiary color for the color wheel, those make sense when painting static two-dimensional canvases, because otherwise it starts to look like a clown suit. I'm of the mindset that every color goes with every other color the more you desaturate them, because the more they gray out, military colors, things like that, where they're out, Space Marines, this guy, the ability to use any color you want together with any other color becomes more and more evident as you desaturate them. As you move them less in their color, it still reads as a purple, but now it's less punchy. This becomes more punchy. This becomes most punchy. You see where I'm going? So vibrancy is closer to the hue itself, right? Or saturation is closer to the hue in its natural state, which is the color wheel. The color wheel is shown to you in full saturation. Very rarely do you find colors in full saturation in nature. So unless you're painting something that is, man-made, where we painted the car red, then that can be full saturated red. But as soon as you put it outside, it's no longer full saturated red because sunlight desaturates it. Everything falls victim to lighting. Lighting desaturates color, period. Okay? So I very rarely paint at full saturation, right? This is one of the closest models you'll see me painting to like pure, vibrant saturation, right? Because it was just a study in bright colors and how you could use bright colors on something that was beat up. So we weathered the hell out of blue and orange and then made a backdrop with clouds and all that to saturate it into that color scheme. But if you look at the HSV cylinder, it will show you how all those colors turn into white, gray, and black as you desaturate them.
Right.
And that then gives you the ability to work with every color together. Does that make sense? So that's what saturation is. And when I say desaturated, it means that when I put, like when we were talking a second ago, when I put skin tone over the top of these colors are going to desaturate. They're going to almost disappear. Right? You'll still see them a little bit, but they won't be as bright as they are right now. And that's the part of this type of painting that scares a lot of people, because they see this and they're like, oh my God, what are you doing? It looks like an alien, right? Not realizing that what's going to happen once we put the skin tone over the top is that you won't even, you'll be able to see some of these colors, but again, it'll be like my skin, right?
Yep.
Like that red, that green, that purple that are in my skin are not red, green, and purple necessarily at vibrancy anymore. They're desaturated. They're these colors with skin tone laid over the top.
Yeah. Hopefully that answers your question there about saturation, desaturated. Great question.
Yeah, these fundamental things, those are terms that are very important to understand, because when you buy the paint is not technically at full saturation out of the bottle.
Right.
Right? It's at its full vibrancy out of the bottle, but does that mean it's saturated? No, not necessarily. Every color can also be desaturated further. So there's a truth to that. But what we have to look at is, if you buy a like our burnt red is a desaturated dark red, right? It is not full color. It has a lot of things that are stripping color out of it, whether it's a brown or a black, or even if it's just the native color of that particular pigment.
Yep. Going back up a little bit, Pragmatic says, if you use the fluorescent yellow or green instead of the bismuth yellow, would it change the underpainted look? Here.
The fluorescents are not very opaque, so it would be a hassle, is what it would be. It would create a problem for me because I would have to work through multiple layers and things like that. I want this to be fairly opaque. So see, I'm leaving the side of her face. You can already start seeing the shadow of her hand. The side of her face that's outside the shadow of the hand is brighter now. I got a little bit of the chin, forehead, and that cheek over there. But I haven't gone with the yellow back on these other cheeks, because this is just what leads me to the brightest portion of my skin tone.
Michael Holt says, I got a bunch of world eaters that I base coated with burgundy and burnt red. For those guys not wearing armor, what do you do for skin?
How do you mean? Like, how
Michael,
do you...
Yeah, you talking about...
I like on World Eaters and stuff like that where I've done a lot of red, I like pale skin.
Pale skins?
Pale or really dark. Something that offsets so it isn't super pink, right? Because skins are a lot of browns and pinks, yellows kind of colors. And so you got to be careful because you can wind up where you, if you put, that in red armor, it might not feel right. So think in terms of, okay, well, what do I do for the skin? You can make it pale or you can make it dark. So like darker flesh tones or pale, flesh tones that are not as healthy looking because you have so much red on the model already.
Mo's asking, if I were only to use the expert set, what color should I mix to get a base for Caucasian flesh? I'm probably jumping the gun.
To make flesh tones?
Caucasian flesh, just using the expert set.
I mean, literally do it the CMYK way, right? You're going to use the cyan, magenta, yellow, and white.
Yeah.
For most, that's how we did the chrome, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how she was done. We just did this one as from all the CMYK colors.
Yeah. Ted Onions has a great question too. Sorry. What does value mean in HSV? Ooh,
value is brightness.
Brightness, okay.
So value is always your scale from brightest to darkest. So the way the HSV cylinder works is it works from full saturation around the outside edge of the cylinder, right? And then towards the inside you have desaturation, right? And then you have value on the vertical column or the vertical side of it. So it goes from white, brightest value at full saturation at the top, darkest, lowest value at the bottom, right? And as you go down, you lose saturation, period. You're not going to have high saturation, low value, because once you get to value 0 or black, you lose all color anyway. So that bottom part of the cylinder is basically just all gray black. And then the gray is the middle portion, right? So as you add white in on the top of the color wheels, you get to the center. And then as you add black, you go down the cylinder, right? So you desaturate it as you work into the inside, and then you drop it in brightness as you go down the cylinder. If you can learn the HSV cylinder and learn that will be the best tool you have in your complement of tools.
Huh.
It will replace your color wheel 100% of the time.
Okay. Iterator says, so what is the typical method to desaturate manually?
White, gray, or black. Right? If you add white to a color, it desaturates it almost immediately. Now, you can desaturate colors by adding other components of themselves, right? I can desaturate that purple by adding the faded plum into it. You've seen me do that a lot.
Yeah.
I do not have to add white because white changes the color dramatically too and turns it into like pastel. Blacks and grays turn it into like muddy versions of itself. So if you want to keep a color with its hue intact, so we're talking hue, saturation, value.
Yeah.
Hue by itself is the color wheel, right? Full saturation, color, right? So you have rules on what colors you want to put together and yada, yada, yada. Then you have the saturation. So as soon as I start taking it to white, gray, and black, I lose my saturation. Now I can also desaturate a color like dark purple with faded plum. And it keeps it purple because both of those colors are still purple,
right?
But one of them is more of a white purple, right? It's more of a bright, desaturated purple. So if I add it to dark purple, it starts stripping the hue out of it and desaturating it while also brightening the value of it. So you start to learn this interplay. The hue, saturation, and value all work together in different ways. If I take the hue, right, and I just play with saturation, add a bright color, a mid-tone color, and a dark color to it, watch what happens. Watch what happens to that color. A mid-tone color, when you add a mid-tone color, will just create another hue. A dark color, when you add a mid-tone color, will desaturate it into a mid-tone value, right? It'll bring it up a notch in brightness. A dark color desaturated or a dark color mixed with a bright color will also desaturate it and will also move it up in value, right? Because depending on how much of the bright color you add. And the reverse is true if you take a bright color and mix a dark color into it, right? Doesn't matter what the bright color is, pink, red, yellow.
Could be anything.
If I take yellow and I add black to it, it immediately strips it into this horrible looking green and drags it down into a different hue, a different value, and a different level of saturation.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah. That's a lot of good info right there.
This is like a stream unto itself, talking about how you work with color in that way.
Yeah.
And these are some of the most important concepts to learn when you're starting to get down into mixing and playing around with color like that. because I see a lot of people, and it's frustrating sometimes. I see a lot of people that get caught up in the color wheel. What colors work great with others? Well, somebody told me don't use, this color with that color. And it's like, well, why not? If you desaturate it enough, all the colors work together. Mm-hmm. But you have to know how to navigate that space before you can do that. Like, that's why you see me very rarely mixing with white. Most of the time I add like pale yellow. It's why our line has so many of those colors in it. Pale yellow, pale pink, faded plum. All of those are colors that when you look at them, you might be like, wow, I'm never going to paint an army in that color. Of course not. But you will use that. If you paint any armies, you will use all of those colors to help you highlight and increase the value of your army, value color-wise, brightness-wise, right, as you go. So learning that HSV cylinder and how color responds as you brighten it, saturate it, desaturate it, all that is super important.
And Amold says, but you lose in saturation unavoidably when you increase or decrease value, right? Can't have the highest value without desaturating with the white.
Correct. That's why that value scale that you see at the top is not going to, all hues by themselves are there at various values, right? So that's why the hue is around the outside, and then as you work in towards the middle, you're doing white, grays, and blacks. And yes, as you brighten or darken a color, you're desaturating it. Always.
Campbell says, I also think all colors look great together at full saturation because rainbows actually just look cool. They do.
It gets crazy when you start looking at browns and what are not pure hues secondary hues. Right? Like, yes, if you just look at the standard color wheel that goes from cyan, magenta, yellow into their components of their direct mixing components, typically you're okay. It's when you start getting into all of the other colors that are not represented there on the color wheel very well, like the browns aren't even existent on the color wheel. And so you get into those, and that opens up a whole different space of color that don't work so well at full vibrancy together. They can start looking like grandma's quilt. Doesn't mean they don't work, and in every situation, like you could paint harlequins, and you could get away with painting them whatever color you want, because they're supposed to be clowns. Makes sense. If you're painting a clown, do it however you want, right? If you're painting something that you want to be homogeneous in its color and composition, then you want to pay some attention to how those colors respond to one another and not do it like if this was my goal was to paint a yellow skin, this would not work, right? These are not colors that you would put together to fill out a composition necessarily, right?
Yeah.
These are colors that work well for what we're using them for, but not well in general to paint together, purple, yellow, and red and green. Not the biggest thing I would put on the palette and say, go!
Yeah.
Because that's not what we're doing. We're painting here for underpainting, for an actual material and substance for the color, not for the color itself, if that makes sense.
Aaron says, advanced flesh tone glaze tomorrow, ?
Yeah. What time is it now?
It is 3:56.
Yeah, we're definitely not doing any color today.
So stay tuned for tomorrow, y'all. He's going to do the glazing tomorrow, which then you really start to see this thing come to life. Obviously, this is like what he's been saying, it's a lot of underpainting, but trust the process. It's the trust me phase of the paint job.
100%.
Oh, time flies, Jason.
Crazy, right?
Time flew.
Great stream today, though. Everybody's asking fantastic questions.
Yeah, and I knew this would be just this one is a point of contention for people, I believe. Painting skin, man, it's just like...
Especially at scale. Because scale doesn't survive the traditional hobbyist mechanism of painting skin. It just doesn't.
Yeah.
Right? You can't just take a dark skin tone, bright skin tone, and a wash and do it on a bust, or something of any scale.
Division Ring says, July stream challenge. Ask Jason enough